Today we have Eddie Vidal, who is the manager of Enterprise Support Services from the University of Miami. Eddie has over 20 years experience in information technology, but his focus is primarily on service delivery and support for IT infrastructures. His current position is Manager Enterprise Support Services for the Information Technology Department at the University of Miami. Eddie's experience is in higher education, hospitality, and travel. He's led project management offices, managed multi-million-dollar budgets, created service-level agreements, implemented customer service initiatives, and re-engineered organizations. Eddie currently serves as HDI Southeast Regional Director, President of the South Florida HDI Local Chapter, and is a member of the HDI Desktop and Member Advisory Board. He has spoken at local, regional, and HDI Infusion conferences, so we're pleased to have Eddie back. He's been on the show with us once before, and he's now back again, so I'd like to turn it over to Eddie.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, and I want to really thank ThoughtRock for having me here once again. Today we're going to talk about communications. And the reason I put this presentation together is because in IT, we're not the best communicators in the world. We don't send a consistent message. A lot of times, if I'm talking about idle processes and incident management, we're very reactive. And we need to understand that we do a lot of great things, and we should show on how we can communicate what we do well and promote the value of our services. So that's how I started putting this all together. I hope that when you leave here, you're going to be able to implement some of the things that I shared with you in your IT department, but also if you're a parent, you're going to get a little kick out of this. So Communications 101, 2 weeks ago, here's an example that I want to use. Jeremy, your dad and I are going to be gone overnight for our anniversary in 2 weeks. And Jeremy says, okay. Then a week and a half ago, his mom says, don't forget that your dad and I are going to be gone overnight on the 18th. Jeremy goes, the 18th? Okay, got it. Then a week ago, repeat after me. My parents will be gone overnight 1 week from today. Jeremy says, my parents will be gone overnight 1 week from today. So today comes, and the parents, we're all here, we're ready to go. Jeremy goes, go where? He goes, gone overnight? You never tell me anything. Parents go, well, Jeremy goes, how was I supposed to know that you were going anywhere? Well, Jeremy, we must have told you a half dozen times that we're going to go out of town tonight. And Jeremy goes, well, if you did, you weren't very direct about it. Well, what's more direct than looking you in the eye and saying we will be gone the night of the 18th? And please don't say Facebook me. Do you want to communicate or don't you? Well, how is that when you talk to your teenagers? How many times do you go to them and tell them something and they don't hear you? Or maybe your spouse. And as I'm sure my wife has told me many things over the time and I haven't responded. But how is that any different than when you're talking about your value in IT and you're communicating some product or something that you're delivering out there and they come back and say, oh, wait a minute, you never told us. Well, the thing about communication is it's not always a one-way thing. You're conveying meaningful information, but the most important thing about communication is that the process is complete when the receiver has understood the sender. So in that example, did Jeremy understand what the parents were saying? Do your end users, do they understand what you're saying? Are you communicating enough? Are you communicating in the right way? So here are some objectives that we're going to cover today. Why I think it's important to communicate correctly. We want to change perception. There's a lot of, for one, I work in IT, but I can see that there's a lot of room for improvement. Like I had mentioned before, we also want to promote the value of whatever we have out there, whether it's we're creating a new service, rolling a product out, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that we fail to do, and if you're starting to follow an ITIL or service management best practice, is that you want to align your services with departments and company goals, but you also want to align your messages. I want to talk a little bit about leveraging social media, and I'm going to give you a couple of tools to get you started. But let me give you an analogy, and this is very timely, is in the sports world, one of the things that you never really notice are the referees or the umpires. And the only way that you really notice them is if they make a mistake. And it's really funny because now in football, the referees came back and they're very much appreciative because they were gone. And sometimes it takes that you miss something for you to appreciate it. But at the end of the day, they only get recognized when something is wrong or when they make a bad call. And that's the same analogy I use for IT. A lot of times we get recognized when a system is down or we're not communicating. And then when we do communicate, we're very reactive, or we brush it under the carpet and say, oh, nothing really happened. And so those are some of the reasons why I think in IT there's a lot of room for improvement. And I use the same analogy for my kids. I always say, if you want to do something, here are the things that I'm looking for you to answer. So I asked this question, and when I do this presentation to an audience, I ask who has a plan in place. A lot of organizations don't. And if they do, is it consistent? And if it's not consistent, you need to think about, are you aligned with the business? And why is it important to have a plan? Well, there's a number of reasons why. You notice, and I'm going to give you an example here at the University of Miami in higher education, and maybe in some organizations this happens. We're very, very decentralized, and a lot of times the messages are not communicated across the board. So we have a lot of these silos. If you start communicating from one point, a single point of entry, similar to a single point of contact that you have for your service desk, you start breaking down those silos. You also create a shared vision, and it's very important to send one consistent message. You want to be proactive, you want it to be effective, and you want it to be timely. I think project management has it right, where they have communications plans when it comes to their projects. But at the end of the day, in IT, when we're sending out messages, we're sending it out from many different people, and we just want to be able to send it from one individual. Here's an example that I use when I compare it to my HDI organization and when I run meetings. Let's say we have our next meeting on November 15th. And this is similar to when you roll out a product in your organization. For our meeting, we try to send out at least 6 messages. So if we start communicating 4 or 5 weeks prior to our event, we'll send out a message per week. When it comes to less than 1 week for the message, and similar to this webinar, how ThoughtRock did it, they would send out a message maybe 4 days prior, 2 days prior, and the day of the event. And you're communicating that your event, and everybody knows, or at least people that are reading your emails, and they may not read every single one, but they're reading them. And I use that same example for when you're rolling out a product or you're making a change. How many times in IT have we sent out something that XYZ system is going to be down, or we're rolling out this new product and we only send out one message? Why just one? And then why are you surprised that a lot of people don't hear about it and you start receiving a lot of calls to your service desk? Use the same mentality that you would to market an event or to market a webinar like ThoughtRock did. You want to make sure that you're sending consistent messages and you're sending more than one message when you're trying to clearly communicate something in your IT department. It's really important. Are you trying to sell some services when you're communicating? What about your service catalog? At the University of Miami, we recently implemented a service catalog, and one of the things that we didn't do is we didn't promote it. We didn't send an email. We didn't communicate it on our website. It was sort of like a soft launch. And I go, well, why? I mean, we have a thing that we've worked so hard to put together, and we feel it's not actionable in the sense that every single service that we have out there is actionable. But there are some areas that you do click on some links and you have to complete some forms. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, wait, here's something that we have that's good. Let's communicate it to our end user because we want them to use the service catalog instead of calling us all the time. We want to lower our costs and we want to lower our call volume because we want to put everything out there. So does your customer know how to obtain these services? That's really important that you do that.
Eddie, a quick question for you. Is there kind of a right and a wrong way or good and bad best practices for actually how you communicate and market your service catalog? Because I can imagine that in some respects you post something and it's such a document of text-filled pages that it's not really worth the effort to communicate that to the broader group. But do you have any thoughts around just how you market and communicate your service catalog?
Well, you may think that it's static, and if it stays static, that's a different answer to that question. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to promote your service catalog in a number of ways. Email's fine. Everybody has emails, but there's social media vehicles that you can use if your organization has that. If you maybe have some lunch and learn sessions, some flyers, and there's a couple of examples that I'm going to use later in my presentation that goes over a bunch of methods and modes that you can use to communicate anything, including a service catalog.
Okay, great, thanks.
One of the most important things also is to ensure that you're aligned with your senior management. Do you sit at the table? Or is your organization one that when something gets rolled out and a new product is out, the first time you hear about it is because you receive a call to your service desk? Well, then you're not sitting at the table. Wouldn't it have been great that you were aware that something was going on? And if you're finding out by receiving a phone call to your service desk, where's the communication? There probably wasn't any communication. Here are some other things that you need to communicate. Let's say, for example, I want to take a system down, and I work in higher education, and registration is about to start, and I'm going to go ahead and say the system is down. If I go ahead as an IT shop and do that, that tells me that I'm not understanding what my business is doing. And do you think that we're going to get a bunch of calls from people and senior management to say, hey, why are you taking the system down now? Well, of course, because I didn't know when registration started. Imagine I'm in retail and I want to do a major system upgrade on the Thursday or the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Well, for retail, when is your biggest season or when is your biggest selling days? It's Black Friday. So I need to know what my business is doing. I need to be aligned with them. I need to be able to understand when are the peaks and valleys and the busy period, so I'm ensuring that I'm not taking down the systems. And that all comes back to communication, sitting at the table, and being on the same page with your business. So what's our perception? In some organizations, I don't think it's that great. And in the ones, and I'm going to speak from experience, I think in the organizations that I've been part of, they're a little bit immature when it comes to this. There is an organization that I worked to prior to the University of Miami, and it was interesting that we started a marketing department and we had a communications director in there. I think the University of Miami is starting to see that too, because we recently hired a communications director to be able to help us communicate many things. She's only been here for 2 or 3 months, and a lot of the work right now is reactive. But I think she comes from a public relations background, so she's going to be able to bring in some great ideas and some great ways to communicate things. But let's take a look at ourselves and our organizations. Let's say that you don't have any communications director or individuals that do that. And if you're in a management position or you're in a service delivery position, why don't you take that role on? And I'm not saying that if you take that role on that that's all you're going to do and I'm going to be just a communications person. No, you're still going to do what you have to do, and you're still going to run your daily operations and do your day-to-day work. But how about thinking outside the box and thinking a bigger picture is, okay, well, let me start communicating in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not saying go big. Start small. Start with small messages. There's some other things that you must be aligned with. And if you see this slide here, I talk about service level agreements. In your agreements, you have to have some plan in there to say, hey, XYZ customer, my turnaround time is going to be this. Well, you're communicating that in a written document, but more than likely you're going to have that posted somewhere on your website. Your service desk or your support individuals are going to have to know what that time is or that turnaround time is or where that agreement stands, because you're going to be communicating it in responses to emails, in response to chat messages, and in response to individuals that you're having conversations with. This is no different for your underpinning contracts when you're working with your third-party vendors. You want to be able to know what those are, and it has to be formulated in some way, shape, or form. And especially with your operating level agreements. I've worked in many organizations where I'm at the service desk and I'm trying to escalate it to the next person, and I have to tell my customer, I I'm letting you know that someone should be getting back to you within X amount of hours. And I'm communicating that message, and it's very important that we're all on the same page. So here's a question I normally ask. And Rick, you brought this up earlier about how to promote the service catalog. What modes or methods are there to be able to communicate your message? Let's say you have that service catalog, you can do a newsletter. Maybe in your organization you have a monthly newsletter or a quarterly newsletter. Use social media. I'm going to give you some examples of how we use social media. Promote stuff on your website. Your website can be a lot of information about the things that you have out, the services that you provide, but you should also put some interesting stuff on there, maybe about your own employees, about your hours of operation. Some organizations have an intranet. Maybe you have a SharePoint site like we do. Of course, phone calls, face-to-face, brown lunches, things like that. Those are all other methods to communicate. And for those organizations that have voice-over IP phones, I was working at Florida International University, and we used the LCD screen to send out messages prior to hurricanes to say, hey, look, this is what the next steps are. You need to pack up your computer. You need to cover it in a bag. They were communicating in many ways, but they were using the voice-over IP LCD screens to let you know what the latest status of it is that's going on. And I'm not sure in other organizations, but I think those are other little tools that are available that don't get taken advantage of. I also mentioned, what about 30-second video clips? Well, when you go to an FAQ for a website, in the newer generation, we like to look at videos. We like to see that. And if you can go to an FAQ to choose the difference between looking at a 30-minute or 30-second video clip and looking at the verbiage that has been provided for this outstanding question that you have, give your audience, give your customer the option of looking at either one. Other ways to communicate is everybody's blogging. There's a lot of blogs out there. Well, why not think about internal blogs? Maybe coming from your CIO once a month, or from senior management, or maybe have a guest blogger, one of your employees, to go and talk about a product that they're working on, or a project, or things like that. So these are many modes and methods that you can use to communicate. One of the other ways that we use to communicate here at the University of Miami is we have this emergency notification system. And this really became very important because of the Virginia Tech incident that happened a couple of years ago. So if we have any emergencies on campus, let's say there's a bomb scare or there's a robbery or something like that, the Public Safety Department uses the emergency notification system to send out messages and communicates. It's via text message, phone calls, and emails. So our organization as an information technology does not use the emergency notification system that our public safety and university does. And those are just other ways that you can use in your organization. So it's important to understand who sends your message. And I'm going to ask you this question. In your organization, is it you? If you're a service desk manager, if you're a middle manager, if you're the guy on the network team and the network is down, are you the one that sends a message? What about the server team? Do you have a marketing person? Do you have a communications person? I'm asking who's sending the message because I'm sure a lot of times in our organizations we send mixed messages and we send more than one message from more than one person. And what I propose and the plan that I've put in place, and I think if you start following some best practices when it comes to delivering services, you want this to come from one individual or one office. Maybe you have an office that has a number of individuals and employees that work there, and it can come from there, but it's one consistent message across the board. My suggestion and my recommendation is to create an IT marketing department, and you can call it SPOM, and that stands for Single Point of Marketing, similar to the single point of contact that you have at your service desk. Who's going to send that message out? Is it a communications liaison? Is it a director? And let's say your organization is seriously considering of hiring a communications director. Would you be hiring someone that's off the streets? Or would you look at somebody internally? Someone who has a good reputation, who is not just an IT techie guy or girl, a person who understands the business and has strong customer service skills and is familiar with the businesses or the other areas of your business. More than likely that individual has held several roles within your organization, and that's probably the type of person who may even step up and start communicating in your organization. For us, we did bring in someone from the outside, and I'm not saying that's not the right approach, but there's different ways to approach it or to go about it, and it's something to think about when you're making that decision to hire someone. Now you're about to send a message out, and how do you do this? Well, there's a couple ways to go about this. For example, if we need to send out a message because a system is going to be upgraded, it goes to a couple of people. And the thing is, what happens is if you get too many people involved, then you never send your message out. Use some automated tools to be able to streamline any message that you want to send out. So if we're going to say the XYZ server is going down for maintenance, you probably have something drafted, you have a couple people look at it, and then you go through a workflow and it's approved. You can create a form to have things filled out, and I'm going to show you a sample form that I created here. But the less people involved, the better, and the reason is that if you have 4 or 5 different people that are going to be looking at this message and they all have to approve it, then your message is not going to get out in time. One organization that I worked for, we had 7 people on that list. If 3 people approved it using an automated workflow that we had, if 3 people approved it, the message was good to go. So consider that when you're going out and trying to get a bunch of people involved in this. When do you send your messages? Well, are they reactive? Are they proactive? How often do you send it? If you're setting up for an event like this webinar, you want to send it out a couple times. What kind of message are you sending now? Is it something because the system was down? And if you're sending that type of message, don't make it so technical. Put together exactly what happened and what you're going to do to prevent this in the future. And then you need to take into consideration, are you sending this to internal users or to your external customer? So what kind of announcements are available? And this is a question that I always ask when I'm doing this in person. Here are a few type of messages, and I've gone over this throughout my presentation. Maintenance, scheduled upgrades and downgrades, or expected downtime. You can send out messages when training is being done or conducted. And then you have to determine what type of message is it. Is it an urgent message or is it a non-urgent message? Here's an example of sending a reactive message. And this is a communication prioritization matrix. And for those of us that are familiar with impact and urgency and the priorities in service management, understand that there's different criticalities when you're sending out a message. And one of the things that I propose and what I would suggest that you use is color coding them. So if you're sending out a message, whether it's email or whatever vehicle you happen to use, maybe you want to call that code red. I know in the medical and hospital industry, if you have a patient that is in dire need of help, they use code blue. So if you're in that vertical market, maybe that's the color that you want to use. If you're sending out a medium type message, you may want to code it yellow. These are just examples that I use here, and you can use any color codes that you feel work for your organization. So let me give you an example of an incident management issue. And I'm using this example because that's my background. So we have a message that we need to send out, and it's reactive. The impact is high. Our mean time to repair is going to be high. So what color code should we use? Well, I would say let's go with red. Now, who's going to send it? Are you going to use your single point of marketing department? Are you going to use the liaison? Is it going to be your service desk manager? It's very important to determine who is going to be sending that message. And how are you going to be sending it? Is it going to be email? Is it going to be a recording on your queue when someone calls to your service desk? Are you going to change that? Use the tools available. Is it going to be social media? Is it internal? Is it external? These are all the messages that you need to ask yourself when you're going to go send something out. And at the end of the day, like I said, if you get too many approvers, then it's going to take time to send something out, and sometimes you need to send it out rather quickly. So here's an example that I got from Tico Energy where we started talking about the color codes. They use red to notify their customers and their end users that they're going to take down a system for maintenance. But then they use green to say that they're in the process of using some distributing some security patches for Microsoft Office and Windows. So this is just one example of using a color code. I also want to share with you why communication is very important and some other examples. For HDI, we have a website, and for some reason the website was down, but we happened to be following their Twitter feed. And before we made a call, we learned that their system was down due to that Twitter feed. And so for those organizations that provide support, use Twitter as an example to say, hey, look, there's things that are happening. I think there's also tools out there, and there's, I think if you use event management in some of your tools that say systems are down and they send out a message, or you can use an RSS feed, Twitter may be one of the vehicles that you use to communicate system issues. Another example that I learned of from a colleague in another organization is that they did a rollout and an upgrade. The VP said it was great, but the thing is the VP had no idea that this upgrade was taking place. So that goes back again to what I was saying previously. You need to communicate. You don't want to be like Jeremy at the beginning where the parents told him, hey, we're going out of town, and Jeremy goes, what are you talking about? You want to avoid your customer saying, I never knew about this. I wasn't aware. So there's always good, there's bad, and there's ugly communication. And like I had mentioned before, in IT services, a lot of times we're very reactive. Learn how to be more proactive. Don't sweep things under the carpet. If the system is down, you need to communicate. And don't just communicate because the customer is calling you. A lot of times we're trying to repair our relationship because we're not communicating enough. And these are all the things that you need to be aware of. That is very important and why it's so important to communicate.
Hey, Eddie, just another quick question, and just in terms of how you would talk to this point. I think some of what you're saying here also talks to anticipation or anticipating what the potential problems are of not communicating or where that message might get diluted. For example, you mentioned the rollout issue. You know, there may be an argument that we communicated that 4 months ago, and then when it happened, how come everyone didn't know about it? I think it's anticipating that probably that message does fall upon deaf ears 4 months ago. So how do we ensure we know that probably leading up to it that there's going to be, you know, folks who just didn't remember 4 months ago? So I guess my point with that is maybe that's back to your single point of marketing, is that there's thought behind an anticipation of those people that might not hear the message the first time and why they wouldn't hear it, but then what are some of the tactics to ensure that they will. So I don't know if if there's any thoughts around that concept, but I think it's a psychological piece, right? When you're thinking about why people don't hear messages, I think sometimes we send out a message, so that's a tick off on the project plan, versus anticipating where that message might be diluted.
Well, you have to anticipate what your customer base is used to hearing, or how they're used to receiving messages. I have teenagers. Do you think they read emails? No. The best way to communicate with teenagers is via text message. And so if our customer's best way, unfortunately, is the brown bag lunch, which takes a long time, or the email, or the phone call, which I don't really recommend, you have to find what works best for your customer base. But you also have to lead them to the water. You lead the horse or the camel to the water in the desert. Doesn't mean they're going to drink from it all the time, but you have to find other ways, whether it's flyers, whether it's those personal relationships that you have. There's many ways to go about it. I'm not saying one way is the correct way. Each organization has their own culture, and you're going to have to adapt to that. So I hope that answered the question, Rick.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Here's an example of a message that we sent back last year. Dear, or to all Central Server users, Maintenance is going to be down during this time, call this number. Well, what's wrong with this message? If the maintenance is going to happen from 6 to 8 and they say to call the support center at this number, did you know that our support center is only open from 8:30 to 5? So are they going to get anybody? No. So it's like, who sends this message? Is it coming through that single point of contact or single point of marketing? Who approved this message? What changes will the customer see? We in IT have a tendency to say this system is down, and we shouldn't be talking about systems anymore. We need to be talking about services. It ties in for your service catalog. Your customer doesn't care about what system. They want to know how does it affect me, and what system am I not going to be able to use. That's the mindset that we need to have, and that's how we need to think moving forward. Here's another example of a message, advisory. Well, what service is down? That needs to be stated in the subject line. What we do is, when we post messages here in our organization on our website, it has an RSS feed that populates our Twitter account and our Facebook account. And I'm going to show you an example of that. But if you look at this message, it's like, what outages are taking place? We use too many acronyms. Is the customer going to know what an acronym is? Voice over IP, PBX? And it says this does not pertain to voice over IP. So it's confusing. And in our situation is we have more than one campus. So what campus does this apply to? So in your organization, if you have different locations, different buildings, if you're in different states or countries, when you send out a message, make it specific. Make it specific to who it's intended to. One of my recommendations to do this is to create a template. And here are the things that this template should say is the purpose of your message. Once again, what application is being impacted and how does it impact the customer? And who to call. So here's an example of a template, and it's a little bit hard to see, but if you need me to share this template, or you can get it from the slide deck after this webinar, but if you need me to share that, I can. But look, under the announcement type, you can see if it's maintenance or training. What's the message title? What if service is going to be affected? What work groups are going to be affected or users? In our situation, is it just faculty and staff? Is it for students, alumni, internal or external? And then if you want to make this a little bit more mature, I put an idle process in there. Is it going to be a reactive or proactive message? You start putting priorities. Is this message recurring? Do we only send it one time? Is there going to be a follow-up? What vehicle do we use? This is a great foundation for those of you that don't have any communication plans out there, or you don't even know where to start. Take this form, use it for yourself, adapt to it. This sets a great foundation to get you started. Let's talk a little bit about social media. It's there. Use it. Use it for your downtime messages. Use it for your maintenance. What about YouTube? How about using it for a virtual tour of your service desk? Maybe do a spotlight on an employee. We have the tools available now. It's not where you have to bring out a video producer and a camera and a tripod anymore to do some of these things. And it doesn't have to be perfect. But if you're getting your message out there in different vehicles, I think it just adds a more personal touch to your organization. And it shows that who you are, because a lot of times in IT, when we call our service desk, we only hear a voice. So find other ways to promote yourself. The key where I think social media really works is it allows dialogue. Because the biggest issue that I've seen with communications, and I'm part of a couple communications teams here at the University of Miami, is that there is a lack of two-way communication. If you want to say, hey, I have this idea, and I want to give it to my senior management, do you have a vehicle? Do you have a way to do that in your organization? Maybe there is no process that you're able to do that. But social media allows you to have some dialogue back and forth, and maybe that's not the vehicle that you're going to use to spawn ideas to your senior management to say, hey, these are some things that I want to implement. but allowing dialogue allows you to talk to your customer, and it once again goes back to the definition of communication, is that the receiver needs to understand your message. And too often in IT, the message is always going one way and not going back and forth. Another way that you can use social media is to do survey or poll questions. Start creating some dialogue. Maybe in your organization you want to know, hey, who's using a Mac versus who's using a PC? And create some dialogue that way. So here's an example of our Facebook page. And we just started this recently, and you can see that there's not a lot of likes, but it's something that we have out there. It ties into some support videos that we have, and it's our way to communicate to our customer base, the external and internal customer base of what's happening within our organization. Take a look at it. It's the University of Miami Technology or Information Technology page, and it's open to everybody. And use our example to help you get started. Here's a sample message that we sent out recently. The financial systems record was going to be unavailable between this time and that time. So use it. One of the things that we use is Hootsuite also. That's another social media tool that you can use. Our RSS feed from our website feeds to Hootsuite, and Hootsuite feeds our Facebook and our Twitter account. So that means that we don't have to send this message and type it up and post it in many areas or numerous times. We do it once and it feeds everything else. Here's another example of our YouTube page. We're starting to put videos, training videos up there. Use it, take advantage of it. It's free technology. I mentioned this before. It's very important to have a consistent message. You need to all be singing the same song. Your service desk, your IT people, they need to understand what maybe your mission or vision statement is, how we communicate. It all comes down to singing the same song. Another thing that you can also do is create an email signature. If you notice mine, we put our social media icons on there and we promote our service catalog. Find a way to use your email signature to promote some of the services and some of the social media vehicles that you use to communicate your message. And if you're a support center rep and you're answering calls, there's always upsell. There's things that you can close out your call with to tell them, hey, don't forget to go to our service catalog. If you have self-service, you want to promote that to reduce the number of calls you have. So in conclusion, some of the things that I went over is don't forget to promote the value of your business. In IT, there's a lot of good things that we do. Promote it, share it. Make sure your customers are aware of that. Don't send messages when things are down. Think like a marketing department. Promote your success stories. Promote your employees. Use surveys to generate dialogue. Video clips. Consider publishing the FAQ videos I talked about. What you definitely want to do is eliminate the never told us. I don't want you to say, or I don't want you to act like Jeremy and how he went to his parents and say, hey, Mom, Dad, I didn't know you were going out of town. So at the end of the day, if you developed a plan internally, or did you develop it internally, only with IT people? Did you reach out to your customer to understand what their expectations are? Remember, you're communicating to your customer. And if you didn't, what do you think you should be doing? You need to be talking to your customer. So here's my contact information if anybody has any questions. I want to thank Rick and ThoughtRock once again for having me present at this webinar. I'm really honored and humbled that you've given me this opportunity to communicate my message.
That's great, Eddie. A couple questions here. So just in terms of it sounds like some great programs that you've got that I think are actually fairly unique at University of Miami. I loved your signature in terms of how it actually puts some visuals behind kind of what the infrastructure is you have in place there to communicate more effectively. And I'm wondering, when you talk about the IT marketing department or the SPOM, the single point of marketing, can you talk a little bit about how you started out and structured that at the University of Miami? I mean, how did you create roles? I mean, is it a full-time job? Or do people volunteer for that? Can you talk a little bit about that structure?
I'll give you in both areas that I've been part of. At Florida International University, we had one full-time person and 2 students working in that marketing department. So it's not like you need a whole bunch of people there. Here at the University of Miami, they recently hired a communications director. But like I mentioned before, you may get someone in your organization to step up and say, hey, I want to start taking on this responsibility. But that doesn't mean you leave your day job. You're going to have to manage multiple responsibilities and put on different hats. But if you're an organization that can afford to bring someone on board and do that, great. But like I said, start out small. And I would do it with someone who's maybe your service desk manager or maybe your service management person or director that has the eyes and ears of the people and the customers in your organization. So if you have the budget to hire someone, great. If not, start internally and start small.
Great, thank you. If anybody has any other questions, please post them now. We'll just take a quick minute to let folks know. And Eddie, if you could do me a huge favor, if you could flip to that last slide, just because there's some additional contact information up there. As mentioned, you can reach out definitely directly to Eddie if you have any specific questions. I think, again, there's some significant creativity that oftentimes you don't see out of IT departments that comes from what Eddie's talking about. You know, that marketing spin on what you do and how you communicate it, I think, I still think it requires a very specific skill set that's very unique to not unique necessarily to IT departments, but unique in terms of it's not necessarily something that IT departments focus on. But I think if you can see that the impact and the power of putting that kind of a communication plan together is can be fairly significant. So reach out to Eddie directly if you want. In addition to that, if you have any questions or you also want to reach out to us directly, we will also put you in touch with Eddie if for whatever reason you don't have his contact information, as well as use our contact information to suggest other potential topics and speakers, whether it's in line with what Eddie's talking about or anything different. And we're always looking for ideas. As I mentioned, we've got a very good roster of speakers and content upcoming, but we're always looking to fill out well into the future. So please, a lot of our sessions are initially set out by recommendations that come from folks like yourself who are listening to Thought Rock Live regularly and have ideas in terms of hot topics that would affect you in your day-to-day. So please do that. Any other questions? Again, I'll give you a few more minutes, but just a reminder for next week, we have Frank Herman from Lean Vista who will be presenting 5 ways how process management tools can ensure ITIL implementation success. So if you get a chance, again, stay tuned to your newsletter that comes out regularly with some additional information. You can hit the thoughtrock.com site as well. But please, if it's for you or for a colleague, please forward it to a colleague, and that's next Tuesday, October 16th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So before we end the session today, Eddie, is there any other final comments that you have, any kind of words of wisdom, motivational points for people to kind of at least get started on something like what you've done at both organizations? Because, again, I do find it fairly unique in terms of how you've approached this. So, again, just wondering what some of the best ways are for people in your job role to be a catalyst for getting some of this done.
Well, if you think like the customer and how you want to be communicated to, maybe that's a start. It's like put your shoe on the other foot. But like you had mentioned before, Rick, I guess it takes some creativity. And a lot of us have some creative minds out there that we think different. And it may be something that you're not used to, but use the examples that you've encountered when you're a customer for other organizations and how they've treated you. And try to see what you've liked out there and apply it to your own organization. Just because we're in IT doesn't mean that we're not supporting customers, and it's a different mindset. We're more like a utility now. You turn on the water and the electricity, and you turn on the PC, and you expect it all to work. But it's all about the services, and it's just a different approach, and I think it's the future, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that comes into play there is you're actually acting like a external service provider, meaning that you put pressure on yourself to perform as if you're holding down a contract, which I think is a great mindset for internal folks to take forward. Because again, when you act like a service provider, you think differently, and you're thinking more like a business and in the services and the value adds that you need to provide, instead of thinking as employees and just as internal customers. So I think what you've done there is you've structured kind of an environment where you are thinking more like a business inside your organization.
Well, thank you.
So that's excellent. So Eddie, again, thank you very much. We hope to have you back again. We hope to see you around, and I'm sure you also tune in every once in a while to Thought Rock Live. So thanks again for putting this together. This is a volunteer effort by everybody that does this on Thought Rock Live. We appreciate the time that you put into it and the professionalism behind the slides and the preparation, and thank you very much.
No, my pleasure. You're welcome, and I'm honored to have presented, and please ask me back. I'd love to do it.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.